when looking at the waste products of intermittent activity, we can look at carbon dioxide, which firstly is removed in three main ways to ensure it doesn't become a fatiguing problem. And the first of these is 70% is broken down into is formed into carbonic acid, which then breaks down into CO2 and water to be removed from the body. Then it's carbaminohemoglobin. This is when carbon dioxide is carried within hemoglobin within the blood, and this accounts for 20%. And finally, blood plasma, when the carbon dioxide is dissolved into blood plasma, and this accounts for 10% of the removal of CO2. The next problem is heat, and this is 80%, a large amount, 80% of the energy created by the body is actually lost as heat. The other 20% is obviously used as oxygen. Hyperthermia is when the body gets too hot, so it rises above 37 degrees. 1 degree above the supposed core temperature of the body is a real issue, and at least it's going to cause a decrease in performance, as obviously muscles can't produce as much force, but it could have much worse effects such as death. Now moving more onto the recovery side of things, one thing that people might do after this is before pre-cooling, they look to cool their body temperature down, so this might be done through vests and that, to ensure that the body temperature begins low, so as it rises it doesn't become a problem, it doesn't become a hindrance on performance. And then finally, ensuring that the performer maintains hydration levels is vitally important in ensuring that fatigue doesn't become a problem, overheating doesn't become a problem to lead to those fatiguing aspects. Right, now moving on to recovery. As we can see, recovery can be analysed in the first main way, which is looking at EPOC graphs. And the EPOC graph will firstly show the oxygen deficiency that an individual has built up, so the amount of oxygen that is required by the body but hasn't been able to be produced, as maybe the person is working anaerobically, as oxygen deficit doesn't appear in aerobic activities. So depending on how long they've been working anaerobically will depend on how big the oxygen deficit is. And then oxygen consumption obviously accounts for this bit. And then we have two main different aspects of recovery. The first is analytic fast, which looks at resaturating the short-term effects, which looks at resaturating myoglobin and hemoglobin, so that the body can continue to pass oxygen around the body and ensure that the muscles are getting the energy required to carry on working. And then the second is the lactic recovery, which is a slow process and will happen over at least a couple of hours after training, but more a couple of days after training. And this is the removal of CO2, the removal of any harmful products that may have been created, like lactic acid, and will help replenish glycogen stores. So the removal of the lactic acid, and that will also include increased cardiac output and increased ventilation to ensure that the carbon dioxide can freely move out the body easily and can be dealt with. We'll also be looking at overtraining, as this is a massive part of why some people become fatigued. Firstly, looking at the recovery of a maximal intensity and very short duration athlete, such as the shot putter and the 100-meter sprinter that we looked at earlier. And their recovery will be a lot based around the analytic fast recovery, mainly because they haven't built up massives of amounts of lactic acid that require ages to get rid of. So this is more about ensuring that the myoglobin is resynthesized and ready to go, and the muscles can continue to be supplied with oxygen. As it says there, to be 100% recovered, it will only take 0.5 liters of oxygen, and it's short. It will only take 1 to 2 minutes. The next important aspect of maximal intensity is ensuring that they can reproduce that burst of maximal intensity performance, and in order to do that, the ATP and PC stores need to be resynthesized, another important aspect of the analytic fast recovery. And this, in order to do this, the aerobic system will have to work, will have to be available to make 3 to 4 liters of oxygen available for the body to use in this process, and this will take about 3 minutes. I mean, we can see here in the graph, there's a quick increase in the amount straight after exercise in the amount of PC. This then tails off as it becomes more resynthesized, and the ATP and PC system become perfectly fine again. Perfectly resynthesized, sorry. Moderate and intensity and moderate duration exercises next, and this will require a bit of both analytic fast recovery and lactic slow recovery, as there's a slightly larger CO2 deficit here, which means that the body requires more oxygen first of all to recover, and also the lactic acid would have become a bit more of an issue. This begins by removing the CO2, which leads to an increase in a decrease in the lactic acid lactic acid levels in the body. So obviously getting rid of that CO2, ensuring that the lactic acid doesn't build up, is a massive important part in reducing fatigue. The muscle glycogen stores will then take anywhere from 2 to a couple of days, depending on intensity of exercise, how long the exercise was, and this all plays a part in replenishment of these stores. The duration of these people that participate in these sports will obviously will find that they ache for a couple of days after. They'll probably suffer from DOMS, which are delayed onset of muscle soreness. These are caused by the tears that take place when participating in exercise, and this will mean that the participant may suffer with swelling in the days leading after and muscle pain, which will affect their performance if they wanted to participate straight after, as they'd be fatigued with the swelling and that. And obviously this accounts for an 800-meter runner. The Cori cycle, I mentioned it a few times earlier. This is when CO2 is the CO2 that is not removed is, when working anaerobically, is then taken to the liver, turned into pyruvate acid, which then turns into glucose. The Cori cycle will then will use 25% of lactate bicrate to creating it into glycogen, and 5% will turn into glucose, which can be used to re-energize the muscles and ensure that fatigue doesn't become a massive problem. The remaining 75% will then be converted into pyruvate acid for the Krebs cycle to re-synthesize ATP, and the final 10% will be converted into protein. Submaximal exercise recovery is, there isn't an oxygen debt, so it the fast analytic recovery, although it will be and lactic slow, they both will be important. Obviously the DOMS will be a massive part. If you've just run a marathon, you're obviously going to suffer from delayed offset. You're going to ache for days after, and individuals may choose different ways to recover. So some of the ways they may choose to recover is nutrients. They may choose to, it is important that an athlete takes in a large amount of calories, carbohydrates that they would have lost during the exercise, straight after they finished. And this is to ensure that fast glycolytic fibers are being restored. So they mainly say about 300 to 400 calories of carbohydrates, and also not just straight after training but days after, ensuring that your carbohydrate levels are completely restored. Massages, so sports massages, rollers, just moving the muscle fibers that may have torn around to ensure that muscle soreness is perhaps released a bit. Cryotherapy, this is the ice chambers or the steam ice coldness that may help because it reduces muscle soreness and will help sustain muscle strength, so fatigue maybe doesn't take as much of an issue, so they can continue training shortly after exercise. An active cool down, just ensuring that lactic acid is shifted from the muscles as much as possible. It just lessens the build up of lactic acid, reduces the potential of DOMS, of course, and also it just gets the blood pumping around to stop dizziness and ensure that oxygen's being passed back around those muscles to re-energize them. And then mentally is the final aspect, ensuring you get a good night's sleep after you've had a training. You maybe look at your breath, depth of breathing, do some little breathing exercises just to completely relax you after training. Then looking at intermittent activities, these will require both, as they require both analytic fast recovery and lactic slow recovery, as they use all the systems. The recovery time for this in an intense game that you've played for the whole game, maybe 1 to 2 days, as there would be a fairly substantial build-up of lactic acid here. And although some bits might be submaximal, it won't be as long as the submaximal athletes, but there will also be a decent build-up of lactic acid that the body requires of getting rid of. And finally, looking at overtraining. Overtraining appears over a long period of time when athletes train too hard, or not too hard, when athletes train too often and don't give their body the time to rest and recover. And the rest and recovery period is vital, and it may lead to some quite serious symptoms that could become issues, such as fatigue, heavy muscles, and inability to train. This will of course affect abilities and performance in-game. Physiological, weight loss, excessive sweating, swollen glands, these are all issues. Also reduced VO2 max. These are all going to affect performance and probably make the individual feel quite unwell, quite ill. Mood disturbances, so depression, loss of appetite, anxiety. They'd be more worried about what's happening to their body. it will start to affect them mentally as well as physically. And finally, sleep disturbance, insomnia, nightmares, waking in the night. The overtraining will affect their whole overall ability to perform at a high level and maintain their high level of performance.